Hey, Matt.
My name is Matt Sparaza. This is,
I'm Father St. Cuchula.
and I actually don't know your last name. So,
It's Jennifer Coffey Shevchuk.
okay, nice. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
You are the guest who has driven the furthest to be on the show,
Excellent.
which is why I feel at liberty to give you the things I just gave Father Sam. You need to hand over your baseball card.
Oh, it's precious.
Yeah. So we were gifted the Father Flanagan baseball card from Spirit Juice Studios for our interview with Edward Morse.
Yes.
For Father Flanagan's movie.
It was great.
It was
a lot of fun.
It was great.
So we continue trying to pray for his canonization. So join us.
Yes.
For the canonization of Father Flanagan.
Yeah.
But Jennifer, it's really good that you're here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, man.
I'm glad that you're here for other reasons. Like as a pastor, I'm glad you're here because you're here at my parish. You're doing a retreat here for the ladies.
Awesome.
So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone. Hemi gets to talk about pilgrimage later on. And so we've got lots of different things here. I would like to give Jennifer credit for just coming to be on our podcast. She drove 5 hours just ready. Unfortunately, she had other things to do while she was in the neighborhood. Just taking advantage of the fact that she's here.
Yeah.
That's great. We want to talk to you about the Jubilee year, the Jubilee year of hope and pilgrimage. But before we can really get into any of that and why we would want you to talk about that with us and have this conversation, can you just tell us who you are? How we ended up in this position?
Yeah, that's great. Sure. So I'm Jennifer. You and I met with through the Catholic Psych Institute doing the CP-NAP program. So back in
We're classmates,
yeah,
Nice.
exactly.
Nice.
pilots, in fact. Like
Pioneers inaugural class. So
Yeah.
I mean, no big deal. Like
I feel like you should be on the Catholic Psych website. The amount of times that we've mentioned the CP MAP program.
exactly, it's a
we
random
are.
effort.
I know.
I
know. I've never gone through the program. I've only been a mentee, which is an amazing experience. So
Fantastic.
I'm not complaining about not having that advertised on the website. I just feel like the tangent
Well,
should be
here's
on
the thing.
website.
Some mentees too.
Yeah.
So yeah. Actually, the first time I was here was the first day, October 1st, 2022, when we had the opening retreat for all new students of CPMAP. And I don't remember that you were here.
I was here.
You were?
Yeah.
Hey.
Yeah, I was here for that.
So
It was 2022.
yeah.
Man. That's why I was definitely here for that. Yeah. And that was a good day.
That was fantastic.
Yeah.
Yep.
I did have to duck in and out a couple of times that day. I remember, but I was.
As you wrote, there was some different share groups that we were broken up into.
You and I were not in the same group.
That's right. Until later.
I was-
and then you work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I was in Dr. Brand's group for that breakout session.
Okay.
I remember that.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yep. Yeah. So the CP-NAP for me was really a culmination of a long journey that started back at Franciscan University.
Hey,
Or up, yeah, maybe even before. But after Franciscan, ended up doing some missionary work overseas and working overseas as well in Austria through Franciscan University, and then eventually ended up in Rome. So we were there at the same time, but we didn't cross paths then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was at the latter.
In like the small group of Americans that are in Rome, and Jennifer and I never actually met each other in Rome.
Yeah. But we did have friends in common. So
Yeah.
that's
fair enough.
Yeah.
So what were you studying while you were in Rome?
So I was at the John Paul II Institute that's connected with the Lateran University, studying theology of marriage and family. So, and that's where I met my husband, and we eventually got married there and had our first child, John Hall. And pretty cliche, but very much, I think.
There's been a trend away from naming Catholic babies John Paul.
Yeah.
In so I'm 27. And very few of my contemporaries are going John Paul, and I think it's because people who had children 5 to 10 years earlier, there's just tons of them.
They flooded the market, basically.
Yeah.
I know one John Paul who is this is a tangent. It begins. I know a John Paul who is he's a strong Catholic, And so I just assumed that he was named John Paul after John Paul II. Safe assumption. Turns out his parents were Beatles fans. He was like, nope, not Catholic.
It's always been a very real positive.
Yeah.
Down to keep in mind.
Yeah. So anyway,
Exactly. No, sorry.
You guys got married in Rome?
Yes, we did.
Tell us what getting married in Rome is like.
Oh, wow.
Because, all right, you're not an Italian citizen.
Right.
Is your husband an Italian citizen?
He's not, actually. He was studying at the Angelicum. He is from Ukraine. And so we were both kind of out of our element. Yep. And we actually met in a Greek class in the Angelicum. And I elected to take Greek there so I could study Greek and English versus studying Greek and Italian. Way too much.
yeah, it's way hard to learn a new language in a new language. Oh my gosh.
So, Italy's known for its bureaucratic tapes, so there was a lot of that to jump through getting married there. But we ended up being married at Chiesa Santo Spiritus, which is just a stone throws away from St. Peter's, and it's the Shrine of Divine Mercy right there. And so that was just incredible to have that opportunity and very memorable. I don't know, it was a great beginning, I think, for art. I like together.
So you were saying before, and this is off the air, but we're going to bring it on here now. Jennifer Coffey Shevchuk.
Oh, right. Yes.
All right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So
Tell us that story, because
So-
I think that's really interesting.
speaking of Italian bureaucracy, when you go to Italy to study or to live, you have to have a permission to stay, and it requires, a lot of paperwork, and whatever the name is on those documents, that is your name. And if you happen to get married and change your name, you lose all of your legal status. So if I were to have taken my husband's name in Italy, then they would have no record of who I was. I'd have to go back to the beginning and start the whole process.
You're a new person.
Oh my goodness, that's exactly the case. So anyway, I ended up keeping my maiden name until we came back to the States, which was we came back more or less permanently in 2018, but that's after almost 15 years of having lived in Italy.
Wow.
So at that point, I added.
And you were in Rome that whole time?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Wow. No, 2003 to 2000.
People dream of that.
Yeah, that was.
I didn't realize how long you guys had stayed.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Well, we got married in 2009, so we both had, we were coming from different directions until we met, but we got married. I'd already lived in Rome for about 6 years, actually, before we met. So,
Man. So you had been on a different kind of visa, different kind of permesso. Like I had a religious student visa while I was there. And I also didn't have to do my own immigration stuff. It was basically the seminary would tell you, like we had somebody who, that was part of their job, was just making sure that everybody's paperwork was on time, to take care of. And so they would help us to navigate all this stuff. But you had to do that on your own.
Yeah.
That's pretty
locally, they had a student liaison at the Lateran that helped quite a bit. But yeah, as a layperson, definitely there was a lot of trying to figure things out on your own, and also trying to navigate living situations. There was a lot of external responsibilities that made it challenging to really focus on studies and things. So yeah, that was a steep learning curve for sure. Not only for me, I think that there's a lot of students that shared the same.
But one of my favorite experiences there was so we went to do the renewal of the Permesso di Soggiorno. So you hand in all the paperwork, you do all this stuff, and they're like, okay, this will get back to you later. And they hand you back your passport, but you don't have the permission anything because they've taken your old Permesso di Soggiorno paperwork and they're going to replace it later. But they haven't given it to you yet because they have to process everything. Well, in the meantime, I had to go somewhere. I don't remember where I went, but I left.
After that little slip of paper?
They gave me like this little slip of paper. Yeah, exactly. So I had this little slip of paper, and it got, I don't know, like it was stuck to one of the pages. And so I get to the customs to come back into Italy, and the guy's looking at the original visa, which is stamped in there, and he goes, "This is expired." And I said, "No, I've got the Permesso di Soggiorno." And he's like, "I can't find it." I'm like, I just I just put in all the renewal paperwork. They didn't get me the new thing. Wouldn't stamp yet. And he goes, oh, all right. And he gave me a tourist visa for 3 months and just let me in. Like, okay. At least
That sounds incredibly secure.
right. Like I knew the right vocabulary to say what I was supposed to.
Yeah.
He could see this. Okay, so it was probably fine.
Yeah.
Just left it alone.
Yeah.
But that was the only time I ever had to talk my way into a country.
Right. For sure.
Yeah.
Oh, there are so many changes in government at that time. I mean, even with the EU and the Schengen countries and how long you had to be out, how long you could be in. And at one time, you could just cross the border over into Switzerland, get a stamp and come back in and your visa renewed, those days, long gone. But
When you had to originally go, you had to get the Schengen visa, right? For your original. Did you have to do that at the consulate in New York?
yes.
Did you have to camp out overnight?
Luckily, I had friends. Helped me out, right?
Unlike you, folks.
No joke. You camped out over in St.
You did?
Yeah.
Like literally on the side.
Literally on a
Oh,
side.
it was.
Yeah, it was like when Star Wars is premiering.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
like the nerds are out to
Yeah.
to get their first
Was
tickets.
there a lineup of people?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I had gone one day thinking this will be fine. The hours are these hours, and I stood outside for 3 hours waiting to get in. And at the end of 3 hours, the security guard came out and said, no more applications today. We're closing the office. And it was the most Italian thing I was experiencing. I just didn't know that was how Italy would work. Foreshadow. So this is my introduction to it. And I was talking to somebody else in line, and they said people were waiting here at 1 a.m. So I talked to a buddy of mine. I was like, you want to come down with me and hang out on the street all night? He goes, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
So he came down and we sat on the sidewalk.
You're how old at this point?
20.
Yeah. It's sounds like a blast.
It was awesome. So between the two of us, we were sitting there, and there were, I'm not making this up, we got there and there were already 8 people in line. Right. And so we just sat there all night. And then in the morning, they opened up. We got to go in, got everything taken care of. So a couple of years later, it was his turn to get his Schengen. And if I'm remembering correctly, I was able to go and hang out with him there too. And then the internet finally reached the Italian consulate, and you were able to make appointments online. But there was a time when we were looking around because you can see the other consulates for other countries all in the neighborhood, right? And nobody else has a line outside. Nobody else has people campers. It's just this one. Oh man,
It's culture shock.
it really is.
This is on Park Avenue in New York.
Yeah, American sensibilities.
Crazy. Oh, it's crazy.
Yeah.
All right. So you study at the JP2 Institute. You get to live in Rome for a long time. Tell us about what's just the fruit of that study and where it led. What happened next?
Well, I think part of the reason I was there to study was I always had sensed this desire to do missionary work. That was really on my heart. And after graduation from college, I went right into long-term mission work, and particularly in Slovakia and in Austria. Felt like, I wanted to round out my education and ideally go back into missions after studying, after really continuing to be formed in the mind of John Paul II, particularly in ministering to families. And so that was my reason for being in Rome. And it was, it's interesting because I kind of jumped in with both feet, and God has had his own plans of what that time was going to be for me. And it was a lot of kind of pulling the idealism of what I wanted to do right down to earth, and realizing there was a whole realm of education that had to go on to make, me more prepared, I suppose, to do the kind of mission work that I desired to do. So Rome was, a testing ground, as it is, I think, for many people, and yet, tremendous fruit. Particularly that's where I was led to my vocation, as a wife and a mother, and so
That's awesome. What was it like starting your family in a foreign country for both of you? Like both of you are equally foreign in this country, and then navigating just cultural differences within the marriage, between an American and the Ukrainian, trying to navigate What was that like?
I appreciate the question so much because, it's not necessarily readily obvious that you're dealing with all of those layers of differences. And it was very challenging. I remember even when my son John Paul was born, and he was born in Gemelli Hospital. Now, Gemelli is the hospital where Pope Francis was just recently treated, but that's also where Pope John Paul was receiving, most of his medical care. So when we gave birth to John Paul and we told the staff what his name was, they were, Giovanni Paolo. They thought it was so endearing in a sense. And that was lovely. Italians really, they dote on children, and there is that dimension of warmth that we were surrounded by. And I think that was really beautiful in the first years of my son's life, because even though we didn't have family around, there was a lot of interaction with him. And but by the time he was about 4 or 5, we were really looking for where to enroll him in school. And we decided we would probably go home back to the States. And so we started splitting our time there between the States and Italy. And then when my daughter was born, we moved full time back to the States.
Was she also born in Rome, or was she born?
No, she was born in the States, in Buffalo, New York, actually. So, we just decided that having family support was really crucial.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. There were much smaller culture shocks when I married my wife, and she grew up near the Midwest, and I grew up here. So I'm near the Midwest.
That is the right way to say it.
She's from Pittsburgh.
Oh, okay.
So it's like she's like almost from the Midwest, and there is an element of people there being nicer, but also they say yins, so nobody really can bend down. So I can't even imagine the layers of different cultural tendencies between America and Ukraine. I mean, it must be massive in Italy. Sounds like great fun.
I'm just thinking like how an American reacts to certain things going on in Rome, Roman traffic and Roman logic and things. Something that
What Roman logic?
not there.
Not logic. Okay, illogical.
Yeah, my favorite experience was being in Rome, and there's a guy who I knew, and we're standing there, and he takes out a cigarette, lights it up, and he's smoking. And I looked at him and said, "Hey," and I pointed to the no smoking sign, and he pointed to the ashtray immediately underneath, like this giant ashtray full of cigarette butts, and he's like, they wouldn't put an ashtray there if they didn't want you to see anything. In spite of the no smoking.
That's awesome.
I can't argue with it.
Yeah, it's really fair enough.
That's the kind of logic I'm talking.
Yeah.
But the way an American reacts to that versus, I don't know how a Ukrainian would respond to something like that, or how. Like, so now you're married, and maybe having these experiences of like,
Right.
this doesn't make any sense to me. Does it make any sense to them? Yeah.
I think the thing is for both Petro and I, being able to really stretch the capacity of your thinking and try to really, in one sense, be open-minded and learn to look at things from a different vantage point. And that is such a life skill in a sense, no matter what, but you're learning it in spades when you have to deal with that kind of layers of adaptability. But the thing that really anchored us together was our faith, really, ultimately, and our commitment. What brought us both to Rome was a desire to serve, in the church and in missions, and we found a real commonality in that. So, yeah, and you kind of bridge out beyond that.
Now, is he Ukrainian, right?
Yes.
Are you Roman, right?
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So what's that like? That's basically an interreligious marriage. No. I'm kidding. That's not.
That is one of the things I really love about our experience of faith is, the classic breathing with both lungs. And we really live that. So both of my children are baptized Ukrainian Catholic. And so we, depending on circumstances, we are kind of living with a foot in two worlds systems. But yeah, it's very rich, I would say.
Is it the seminary for the Ukrainian Catholic Church in Stanford?
Yes. Yeah.
I live like maybe 3 minutes from it.
Our we kind of, in a sense, we partake of my hometown parish now that we've moved back, and there's a Ukrainian Rite Catholic church about half an hour away. So we go there upon occasion, and our priest and our bishop, they all went through seminary here in Stanford. So yeah.
So I found out shortly before I was to be ordained a deacon that I was Ukrainian, right?
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know. And in hindsight, if I had a little bit more maturity at that time, if I had a deeper level of understanding, I don't think I would have transferred right. I would have worked something out where I could be by ritual or something.
Meaning like you were baptized Ukrainian Rite?
No, I was baptized Roman Rite. I was baptized in the Latin Rite of the church, in the Latin church, but I was baptized before the 1983 Code of Canon Law was revised. Okay. And the old Code of Canon Law, 1917, basically said that you belong to the rite of your father. It's automatically transferred no matter what church you're baptized in. So if you're transferred, if you're baptized rather into in a Latin church, but your father is of the Ukrainian church, you are Ukrainian. And that's it.
Yeah.
You belong to that right. And it was a way of preserving the Byzantine Eastern rites and everything in those areas, because they would have so many people in different places who couldn't couldn't find their particular church. So you belong to that rite. Okay. Well, my father didn't know that he was Ukrainian, right?
Wow.
Because he was raised in the Latin church also. Because my grandfather was baptized.
He didn't know.
He knew that. He was baptized in the Ukrainian church, but then he married the daughter of Sicilian immigrants. And so, of course, she was Latin.
Right, yeah.
And therefore, they raised their kids in the Latin church, and that was it. It's just nobody really thought anything of it.
Right, yeah.
And then come to find out that, no, I actually belong to the Ukrainian church. So we had to do a transfer of rite. Because
what does that entail?
It was paperwork that the bishop signed. So that's
Not it wasn't flashes.
No, it wasn't anything as cool as it would sound. But
they just throw oil on you.
But I'd never entered it. I think I've only been to 2 divine liturgies in the Ukrainian church my entire life.
Yeah.
I had no experience of it. I knew no Ukrainian culture, heritage, or tradition or anything, because it was all lost. My great grandfather, didn't pass any of it on.
Right.
And I kind of look back and I go, I feel like that's a little bit of a loss. So for your kids to be able to grow up in both churches and to have a sensible,
it's a very distinct, it's a unique perspective.
I have to say, when my daughter, she's 8 now, but we go to divine liturgy, and to hear her sing the prayers, it is so beautiful. It's in her, and then she feels very much at home in the Latin Rite as well. So I feel really blessed by those, that dual reality that we get to live, up close and personal.
It's good that she's singing it and
Yeah.
and getting, there's a particular style,
Yeah.
right? To the Haitian, it's very beautiful
Yeah.
that she's able to do it. So great.
Did you start studying some of the Eastern Fathers a bit while you were in Rome?
Yes. I mean, Chrysostom, mainly, and I think the time that I served in Slovakia as a missionary, and also when I was in Austria working with a program that welcomed people from Central and Eastern Europe, I was already very well acquainted with the culture, and even to a degree the language, because of living in Slovakia. And so I had a real affinity, I think, and affection for the differences and the richness of Slavic culture in general. So, yeah.
Is there a particular Eastern Father that meshes best with JP2
That's
and his theology of the body?
I feel like that's a dissertation work maybe to happen, but that is really amazing.
I try.
I love Chrysostom. I think it's because he speaks, the part that catches me is the idea of the process of becoming like God, really.
Right.
And when you mesh this with an understanding of our human dignity, I feel like there's a lot of
and
that understanding.
And the family being the mirror of the Trinity, there's something there that you can bridge that gap somehow. Yeah. I don't know much about Chrysostom, meaning like I haven't read much Chrysostom, and also I don't know much about the man John Chrysostom. But the one thing that I do think I know is my understanding is that he actually has some like romantic language, meaning like he's written about the family and
The beauty of Christian
right
marriage,
and right the beauty of Christian marriage. So I know.
and very challenging.
In fact, at St. Peter's, in St. Peter's Basilica, isn't the chapel where Chrysostom's remains are, isn't that the wedding chapel?
Wow.
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure it's the wedding chapel. I wouldn't have made that connection until you just did it, man. It's a thing, right? That's really cool. That's really cool. Yeah, on the left-hand side, it's always behind like the grate. You can't get in there unless you have like special behind.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's the wedding chapel.
Wow. Yeah.
And I think that's where John Chrysostom's tongue is. I think. I don't know if
He was pick. He was gold. I was gold. Yeah.
Oh, that's really cool.
That's it. That's just that sweet stew beyond right there. I'm a Franciscan on mine.
Oh, you are.
Yeah,
Great.
yeah. But so you spend time in ministry. I'm make sure I have the timeline correct here. You spend time in ministry. You come back to the States full time, and then from being full time back in the States, where you go? How do you end up at CP Math? Is there like a huge 5 years, 10 years between those two things, or?
Well, I think what it was we were both in full-time ministry. Eleni,
Okay.
we ended up in Rome, where the shift changed to be more academic.
I see. Okay.
And we were there and eventually got married there. And that, shifted how we were living our ministry, our mission, so to speak. And eventually my husband and I started a business in Rome, which was kind of underpinning. It was providing for our family. And what that was we worked in the tourism sector. And so as you were talking about the culture shock of going to get your permesso di soggiorno and, how the just American sensibilities are trying to navigate Italian realities, doing it on your own is really challenging. Yeah. And what we found is we would be going back and forth to Rome, living outside the city, and we'd cross paths with tourists a lot. And they would be totally disoriented, totally frustrated. There's no signs in English, they're exasperated. They'd have basic needs like, needing the bathroom or missing their stop, not having directions. And very organically, we just began to step in and be like, okay, it's okay. We can, we'll help you out, And then
You sound like it's okay.
there's a
Are you in danger?
But eventually that grew into a business, which was a tour business. And and we began helping like cruise clients, that were over there. And that was really what we did for quite a while before we moved back to the States. And then at the point that we moved back, I mean, my focus really went into education, for with my children and kind of supporting the business from behind the scenes. And my husband would go back and forth to Italy and the States. And in the midst of that, we were working primarily with secular tours and cruises. But we would periodically get a request to host a pilgrimage for people because they knew we had studied there, they knew who we were, and knew we were a thoroughly Catholic company, even if we were doing kind of, secular service. And so we began hosting pilgrimages, periodically. So, there's always been a back and forth between the States and there. And meanwhile, I was involved quite a bit with formation and education in the States, teaching and things like that.
What was it like working with those, like a secular tour group coming to an extraordinarily Catholic city, like a city that really doesn't make any sense unless you're also going to engage the Catholic faith in some way? You can only spend so much time at the Roman Forum before you're like, there's not enough there's got to be more than just this, because every time I turn around, there's another church. So what's that like? I can look at the ruins.
Every time I turn around.
Yeah. As someone who has spent 6 days in Rome,
You get it.
Every 3 feet.
Like you go and you see the ruins all over the place, but then you also see these churches everywhere. And so, having never engaged with Rome from a secular perspective, I don't know that perspective. I went to Rome as a seminarian. Was already pretty committed to the whole idea of like Jesus and church and stuff. I was on board. They'd been demits. What's it like working with a secular tour, and having to explain not just what the ruins are, but that these churches aren't just museum pieces, but they're actually active shrines and places of prayer, pilgrimage.
Yeah, I think that it's interesting when you see different personalities come through, because, and when we would get a very wide variety of backgrounds, the whole gamut. But you see that there is still a searching for something that is almost like an anchor point, like a reference point, no matter what it is. So even if it's, if a person's not particularly religious, they have an appreciation for, for beauty, for history, for influence, like for culture, and yet at the same time you can almost see, and like a fragmented appreciation. They're like, well, that is really fascinating. It's a beautiful church. I'm going to take a ton of pictures, but it's removed. I'm here to say I was here and it was beautiful, but almost like with a detachment or disassociation from that. But then, there really are those who come who might not seem religious, or, they're not there on a faith experience, but they're sensitive to the beauty or the, something beyond them. And you can, I think you can perceive, as you do when you work with people in general, there's movements of the heart.
Yeah.
And sometimes it takes a long time for those seeds to break out into something. But knowing that you're planting them, even in how you represent something. Now, we didn't, at a certain point, the demand was bigger than what we could do ourselves. So we went into more of like the structural leadership form and have really wonderful contracted guides that work with us. And most of them are people of deep faith who are also, graduates of the pontifical system that work with us.
That's great.
So they are, and some of them have gone all the way through to get their certification as a tour guide. And, they're very adept at being able to lead several hints. And
I want to hear your favorite like tourist story, like the craziest thing you encountered with a tourist in Rome. But I'm going to tell you a tour guide story. This was in Assisi. So I'm in Assisi, and this tour guide is giving this viciously anti-Catholic take on St. Francis. And I was appalled by everything that she's saying. And she's basically saying that...
Are you wearing clerics?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I was a seminarian. I wasn't a priest yet. But she's essentially saying that St. Francis of Assisi is Che Guevara in a Capuchin habit. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's not accurate. Francis was not a communist, and he was not an anarchist. And no, that's simply not correct. And she said, and the Pope was opposed to him because the Pope wanted to cling to his power. And I pointed, we're like right at the fresco of the dream of Innocent III, where he has the dream of seeing the little man Brown holding up the church. And that was the dream that inspired him to approve of everything that Francis had done. He had met Francis the day before. He wasn't opposed to him because he didn't see Francis as a threat to power or anything like that.
Right.
Can you explain that fresco? And she tells the story, and I'm like, so the Pope hated him? And I said this like I was being a jerk, okay? Like my stubborn, kind of sticky, not so polite part had come out.
Yeah.
I wasn't really being a good person.
I knew we would get to see PMAP.
Yeah, offensive behind that, right?
Yes.
So that, of course, has come out. Well, I then was talking to another tour guide about this experience like later on, and as I explained, the general picture of St. Francis that had been painted, this tour guide who I'm talking to gets very upset, looks at me, who was this person? They should be banned from giving tours. We can do that, you know. And it's like, we're going to revoke that license because this person is not supposed to be speaking that way.
Right.
And distorting the truth. And I was like, this is so exciting. Unfortunately, I have no idea who the tour guide is. So, I have long forgotten the name. And this lady who had given her, she was just so nice and so like genuine, though, like understood the faith and understood the purpose. There's both the historical, there's the art history that's present. There's also this reality that this is reflecting something that's much more real. So anyway, tell me your favorite tourist story. The craziest thing you ever got to see them do.
This is a conversation for my husband because he has seen the full gamut. My experiences were pretty tame and and uninteresting. I'm trying to think.
I always used to like it. So
Yeah.
like we were usually out in groups as seminarians because we're walking to or from class together and you're having a conversation along the way. So people would overhear you speaking in English and they would ask you a question and they'd stop you and ask for directions or something like that. Well, there's one day I was by myself and I'm walking along and these two ladies stop me and say, "Excuse me, y'all speak English?" And I said, "Yeah, I speak a little bit." And I just meant it as a joke. Yeah, I speak a little bit. But apparently my New England was too strong. As they didn't catch the joke. They just caught, I speak a little bit. So they started talking to me and giving them directions and they said, "Your English is better than anybody we've met so far." And like, oh no, I thought you caught the joke. I was clearly an American. Oh no. It was great, yeah.
But that speaks to the disorientation that people go through when they find themselves in a foreign country and they're like, everything's new. I'm the only person, in my paradigm here. And so when then you stumble across someone who's like, no, I actually know what you're going through. There's this, I don't know if she felt like relieved after she found out that you were an American and you knew how to help her or.
I like that you're saying, because I don't think I've ever had the perspective that people coming in are feeling that disorientation. I know I felt disoriented, but the difference, like from my experience, was going in surrounded by a whole bunch of other guys who were equally disoriented, but who also had somebody to say, "You guys, they're on this bus." And so we followed the leader and we just did what we were told to do. And then along the way we learned, but we always had somebody kind of mentoring us. It wasn't it wasn't a guide, but we had somebody kind of
Accompaniment.
Yes.
Yeah.
But I don't think I ever thought of it that way. So I really like this. This is good. Especially this will be good for the pilgrimage in September.
Yes, 100%.
That I can I'll keep in mind. People are feeling disoriented because.
Are you going on? Well, tell me about this pilgrimage. I banged on the table. Tell me about the pilgrimage. But are you going on it?
I am going on the pilgrimage, but I think Jennifer is better equipped to tell you about the.
No, I know. I just wanted to.
Yeah, fair. I've looked at the itinerary.
Okay.
What do you think?
Okay. I think it's gonna be fun.
Yes.
I think it's gonna be fun. I'm looking for. Can I escape here? Rather than or do my own thing there.
Yeah.
I'm good enough, maybe. I promise.
There's a little bit of free time.
Yeah.
Between 9 to 9:30.
Yeah, so before we get to pilgrimage, though, tell us about you start leading pilgrimages, and then how that's developed here, because I definitely do. We need to talk about pilgrimages. Important, but
Yeah. Well, it almost began as a trickle where there was this, people, mostly Catholics from the States that knew we were what we were doing and then wanted to put a group together and would come over. And so not only to Rome, we began to have other pilgrimage sites that we would frequent. And the momentum of that actually picked up shortly after COVID. So even though there was sprinkling of that all the way through since we started, I guess it was in 2008, more or less. And then really right around 2021 or so, there was more and more demand. And the interesting thing is, certainly from Catholics, but then we started hearing from other non-Catholics who wanted to come and make like a religious experience. I don't know that they would use the word pilgrimage if they have that kind of vocabulary, but wanted to target sacred sites, really. And so we began to put together itineraries, bring groups together, and facilitate this. But it was obvious, and I myself went on a few of them, but my husband really was part of the whole operation. But in the ones that I would go, accompany with you, there was a sense that this was a real step towards God. There was a real, it was a clear difference from secular travel, and at the same time, the search and the desire of the people who were coming almost became palpable. And it was like, of course, we would at times we'd have a chaplain, we'd have daily mass, we would have opportunities for confession, adoration, and yet you could feel like there was a momentum that was building and yet wasn't quite reaching, a full expression of what it could be. And so, I was kind of carrying this experience in my heart, and people would ask for pilgrimages again, and I began to think, like, how can we really make this an experience that is that really has deep roots, that really impacts the totality of the person, that isn't merely kind of checking the box of I've been to the Vatican, I've been to, but actually has a real personal connection with the places that we're seeing. But again, just carried that in my heart. The interesting thing is, in my own story of conversion, of, personal salvation, when I was in high school, I had a very profound experience of conversion through a pilgrimage. And having experienced the power of that, coming back home, and I was fortunate enough to have an experience of being accompanied, not just practically, but also with a sense of spiritual accompaniment before we left. And then when we came home, the totality of this experience kind of became a watershed moment for me in my own faith. And that was all the way back in high school. And from that point on, if I look back at the power that experience had for my life, for my faith, I see what potential going away to encounter God in a way that's really intentional and multi-layered. It really, not to be cliche, but it really can be a life-altering experience. And so being able to see the potential of that, having lived it, and wanting to find a way to offer that to people, it just began to grow. So, yeah.
So cool. So that leads you to CPMAP.
Well, I would say I was led to CPMAP kind of built on my previous education, having a degree in like mental health and theology, or also having had this experience of having been accompanied. My parents were part of the community called the Anawim community in Western New York. And the co-founder of that community, Sister Barbara Brennan, became like a mentor to me. But, she had a very deep understanding of John Paul's personalism, and was, in a sense, I feel like ahead of her time in a way, because she was doing much of the accompaniment work that I found myself wanting to do for others, and didn't know how to, where was that bridge that I would be able to be kind of skilled and educated and in the position to offer to others what she and others had done for me. And, I think there was a whole series of providences, part of which was having met Dr. Reg in Rome when he was a friar, and become friends with him. And so we remained friends that, throughout all the steps that our lives had taken us. And when he started the CPMAP program, he just happened to mention it to me, like, I think you would love this. And I took one look at it, and I'm like, this is what, in a sense, I was waiting for. This is the missing link. And so I didn't at the time see the connection between that and pilgrimages yet. But, it it was a process of kind of going through the CPMAP, going through all that meant for me personally, and the transformative experience that was, and learning to walk with people, my mentees in a deep way. And then kind of at the end of the CPMAP program, you're asked to do a capstone work, right? And so it really became a part of discernment. Like, all right, my origin for even coming to Rome, for coming to CPMAP, was because I felt this kind of missionary impulse. And how is that going to take shape? And what are the tools that God has, through his providence, through my life story, what has he put in my hands? And I'm like, how do I reconcile, all of these things together? And I don't know, it was a beautiful unfolding, in a sense, that really brought this idea of creating pilgrimages that were really integrated and offered a sense of integration for people. And so that's the project that we've been working on this year.
It's called Integration Pilgrimages. Right?
That's right. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask the question: what is an integrated pilgrimage?
Yeah. So
I love defining our terms. I love it. Anyway, sorry.
So, I mean, with any pilgrimage, of course, you are stepping away from your routine. And in this moving away from something, there's a capacity that suddenly you're open in a way that you just are not when you're in, kind of on auto zone. And so in which ways are we open? Well, we think, okay, spiritually, that's usually people go on a pilgrimage because they have a spiritual burden or they're seeking something. But the truth is, like, when we go anywhere, we're bringing all of who we are: body, mind, soul, spirit, the whole gamut. And the more we are able to bring the different parts of ourself into that experience, the more we're available to be touched by grace, to be touched by the Lord. And so I think the intentionality of bringing those pieces to the forefront with the pilgrimages that we're developing, it's to speak. We have talks that explicitly bring that out, spiritual talks, psychological. We have a real emphasis on preparation beforehand.
Okay.
And this is, again,
I thought that might be a part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, nowadays, when you go on pilgrimage, you might have a week. You might have, if you're really lucky, 12 days. In the old days, when people went on pilgrimage, they would walk for 40 days, and the process of being able to prepare yourself for pilgrimage while on pilgrimage, it was built in. But now you get on a plane or you take a bus ride, and the transitional time is so brief that it's almost like it's so easy to miss the crisis, like the moment.
Totally.
So if you are really able to kind of be accompanied and sift through some of the things, kind of, begin to take off the layers a little bit, so that when you're in this intense experience, you're as, prepared as you can be, and you're being accompanied in that. Right. That's one of the things that we pass on for. Right?
This is awesome.
Yeah.
This is really cool. I'm just one thing. I don't know if it's in the virtual retreat for Catholic Psych, but it's somewhere in there. He's got that idea of, like, he being Dr. Greg pitches, like, sit in a different seat today, look at something differently. And that's like the micro version of the macro version. The big version, go on a pilgrimage, like, totally change every single thing about your surroundings. So I love that the incorporation of that idea, because with sitting in a different seat, it's so small, but it really is that idea of change your vision today, and so that's awesome.
I love that you made that connection, because the fact is, we are, it's not just a matter of mentally trying to put yourself, there's something about actually moving your body, and this whole idea of, again, we are body and soul together. There's something very Catholic about really understanding the incarnational aspect of what we do, and being able to say there is a particular grace of getting up and moving to the next seat. Like you actually, place does matter. And if you look at even, all the way back to all the way through salvation history, it's like there have been invitations like pick up and move and pick up and go. And, um, I think there's something kind of universal about what that does for us to grow us, and to challenge us, but also to bring us to new places where we can be loved, even more. Especially you're in a place of vulnerability when you are out of your element, and to be able to be open to be loved in that place. It's metaphorical. There's a lot. Yeah.
This description that you're giving of pilgrimage is so good because it goes deep, and it gets at the heart of what's really happening during a pilgrimage. I think that it's easy to go at a surface level of describing pilgrimage. I'm going from my home to this sacred place, and I'm going with the intention of praying there. That is a pilgrimage. And that's an accurate definition. Canon law says that bishops have to go every 5 years to visit the Pope and to pray at the tombs of the apostles.
Wow.
And I didn't know.
Yeah,
So I didn't know about the apostles.
it's giving them the instructions. This is what you are to do. You are to go and pray at the tombs of the apostles in Rome and visit the Pope, and you'll give him your report. So there's a pilgrimage aspect of it. This is what we do when we go on pilgrimage. But if the bishops have that, if they read into what that means, pray at the tombs of the apostles, open your heart to what the Holy Spirit does to the apostles, which is to send them out on that mission, right? And to see that this change of place that opens your mind and heart to see things differently, to see the world differently, see the church, your place in the world, your place in the church in a new light, and to have that openness. And then I love this description of they used to walk. And they used to walk. It would take them sometimes months at a time to go on pilgrimage and to return. And now you get on a plane and 6 hours later, 8 hours later, you're there.
Right.
And you're able to do the pilgrimage that much simpler, right?
Right.
But there is something so powerful about changing your location to get that new perspective. And all right, I'm torn on this. So talk me through it, Jennifer. There's a part of me that knows that that's what happens, wants to keep it secret, because I want people to be surprised by that element. Now, of course, we're recording this, and anybody who listens to it will now know the secret. But this is one of those things. I find this with like our youth mission trip every summer. The kids go and they're told, you're going to serve. And they're like, I'm going to get community service hours. I'm going to take care of poor people. I'm going to do something good for somebody else. And what they don't realize is that in the downtime, when they're not doing manual labor, they're hearing the gospel. They're having opportunities to pray. They're opening their hearts to what God is doing. And so there's this changing their location in their normal routine, helps them to step out of the place where they're comfortable and where things are automatic, and into that place where they're experiencing God's grace and something new is happening. But the secret is just telling them they're going to serve. Not just tell them, but the thing that gets their attention is I'm going to go serve. Sometimes the attraction of pilgrimage, I get to go to this place.
Yeah.
And I get to see this cool thing that I won't get to see otherwise. It's probably not good that I don't want to tell people about what you're describing, right?
I think it's like many things. You get out of it what you put into it, and God, I feel like is so, he meets us where we are at. So whatever our intention is, and to the degree that we're open, like he's going to meet us there. And there are people who are ready to jump in and go the whole distance on all levels and be fully there. And there are people, all of us, who are at different stages of openness in different places. And, that's not an obstacle to God in our, in the story of our life coming, being unraveled at the pace that we're being transformed. And so, I think for those who want to have it be an experience of seeing a beautiful sight, a religious sight for the first time, that is a step, and there's a grace to be received even in that, and yet, who are we to limit what that can be? And I think that's what I feel particularly invested in, is opening up the possibilities that this can be a truly grace-filled encounter. Because I think that's the other thing that, at least in my own experience of being on pilgrimage, the thing that made the difference is along the way you were met by Christ, and it was dynamic. There was relational context there, and it's different than taking your camera and going and seeing these sites and sending postcards. It's a totally different experience.
And don't those experiences stick with you in a powerful way? I remember certain pilgrimages that I've done where praying in this spot, that was the place where everything else fell into place. I was like, I went to this one location, or I prayed in this chapel or in this shrine, and that was the most profound experience. And everything else of the whole pilgrimage kind of pales in comparison to that one moment, or to that 1 hour, or that particular experience, right? And if it wasn't for the fact that I was on the pilgrimage, that holy hour, or that word that I heard in a homily, or whatever it was, would not have happened if I wasn't in the context of that pilgrimage. But what a powerful moment that could be, right? Okay, because we have to go and do a meeting about pilgrimage, before we could do that, though, let's talk about pilgrimage in the context of the Jubilee year. And so first, I'm gonna ask it this time. I know the U.S.
Please.
What is a Jubilee year?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, this goes all the way back to, ancient times, ancient Christian, Judeo history, all the way back to Leviticus, actually, where the Lord asked for a year of Jubilee every 50 years. And this was a time where debts were forgiven, prisoners were set free. It was really a year of restoration, like land that was taken from families was returned. And, clearly a year of joy and celebration and restoration across the board. And so, now the church every 25 years celebrates a jubilee that has real significance. So here we are in 2025. The last one was 2000, and it's shocking, just to go back, for those of us who were near Rome at that time, or just to see it's the momentous grace that happens when the church together is acknowledging this year of grace and commemorating it. And of course, there's the opening of the Jubilee doors, the holy doors, right? And so in the four major basilicas of Rome, there's these consecrated doors that are only opened on the Jubilee. And they're open for a little more than a year. I forget, is it opened on Christmas Eve? Is that the night?
I think it opened Christmas Eve, and I don't know when it closes again.
January 6th of 2026.
So short.
So,
That.
the significance, I was thinking about this, coming in, like, that the church, it's opening its doors and really ready to receive, but also ready to bring the graces, the richness, the life of God, the restoration of God out. So there's this open door moment, and of course, we're all invited to Rome, and there's a particular, we're all invited to go on pilgrimage in general, and
Even not in Jubilee years.
yes, absolutely. But thinking about the theme, Pilgrims of Hope.
Yeah.
Is that?
Yeah, the Jubilee of Hope it's a great ring to it, isn't it?
Well, just thinking about like the symbol of hope being an anchor and being, I guess for me, sometimes when I think about hope, it's very nebulous, and it's like, abstract, but knowing it's symbolized by something you can ground yourself to. You can actually anchor yourself to a reality that is unseen or is often missed in our life, right? But is nonetheless that concrete, that real, that we can anchor ourselves in that. And right now, when there's so much pain and so much darkness or heaviness, that to know that we're invited into a year of restoration, with all that we bring of ourselves, and that the hope that can be. I think it's a really timely message for where we're at as people going.
At the North American College, outside the chapel, there was a bronze plaque of the 2000 Jubilee. It was just like a commemorative plaque. It was affixed to the wall, and it was affixed to like the brick wall. So this bronze plaque on a brown brick wall, you barely noticed that it was there. And look, as Jubilee logos go, that's not the point of the Jubilee. So like ignore the logos, right? Because they're not real helpful. But there's the Jubilee thing. And do you ever come to Vespers at the NAC on a Sunday night?
A couple times.
So we do it.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
You get like the Hulkmeyer Seminary. And what's not uncommon for pilgrimage groups to come through also. This group led by a priest who went to the NAC is now coming through on a pilgrimage. He knows bringing them to Vespers. It's really cool. They get to see all these seminarians. They get to hear the singing. It's going to be good for them. And again, not an unusual experience to have that pilgrimage group kind of standing outside the chapel after Vespers, just kind of watching the parade of seminarians leaving, right? And so there's this one guy, and he used to like to mess with the groups that would come through. So he sees the group standing there. He goes, "Oh, I know exactly what we're going to do." And he goes over to the Jubilee bronze, and he just puts his hand on it, and then blessed himself and walked away. And he walks down the hall, and he turns around. And sure enough, just like he hoped, people are going up and they're touching it, and then they're blessing themselves, having no idea why they're doing it. And he's like, "I got him."
You can say,
Blessed plaque.
It wasn't me. I wasn't that clever. I'm still not that clever. He had this ability, man. I so admire that. Anyway, pilgrimage in the Jubilee, though. What's attached to it? What goes along with making a pilgrimage in the Jubilee year?
As far as I know, plenary indulgence is that correct answer.
what is a plenary indulgence?
Yes, you do. I should.
I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. Well, it's the remission of all forgiven sin, of the punishment due to forgiven sin. So really, talking about a reset, talking about restoration, debts forgiven, slates,
Right,
prisoners set free.
Appropriate.
Yeah. So tremendous grace.
So the pilgrimage to Rome is obviously, there's something special there. And some of the great shrines in Europe, there's going to be these great things. So you go to Lourdes, you make a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. You could do the footsteps of St. Paul into Greece. You go to any of the major shrines, Czestochowa, Knock, all these great places where God has been so present, where the Blessed Mother has appeared and everything. But not everybody gets the chance to go to Europe, to go to pilgrimage. Do you have a favorite pilgrimage destination here in the United States?
Currently, our favorite North American destination is to the Oratory of St. Joseph in Montreal. And it's a very special place, a very special calling to go to St. Joseph. And so, we have a number of pilgrimages set for Montreal this year. And
And it's through integrated pilgrimage.
Integration
pilgrimage.
And
I was just telling my wife that I wanted to go there.
Oh,
like
amazing.
a week and a half ago.
Amazing. Yeah.
Probably longer. I'm not good with numbers.
Yeah, we actually just
sense of time.
we just came back from there 2 weeks
you?
ago. Yeah. The whole story of Andre Basset and his devotion to Saint Joseph, and just it's very powerful. His paternal presence. It's pretty exciting.
I have a question about the Jubilee. Do we have time for it?
We're good.
Okay. The Jubilee pilgrimage. Not trying to mess with your itinerary. I want to make that very clear. It strikes me, nor am I qualified to. I just
Where are you going on the pilgrimage?
no. Well, but so because I was thinking about it, and you were talking about restoration and a time to be set free, and I think one of the primary burdens people have today is they are slammed with too much noise. So I was thinking and wondering if an aspect of the pilgrimage would be an invitation to silence.
I love where you're going with that.
Okay.
And as part of the integration of approach, is really reverencing the needs of the human person for silence, for peace. And living in Rome, that is very hard to accomplish.
Well, that's why I was, because I was like, I don't know if that would. I don't even know if that's even if you can do
Okay,
that.
so I will say there has been an intentionality building the itineraries with all of this in mind to the best of our ability.
Yeah, of
It's
course,
always
of course,
putting the
yeah.
feedback and all
Right,
of that.
yeah.
But
Again, I'm not qualified. You are the one that's qualified.
But very much that is particularly in places that are that frenetic,
Right,
busy.
right.
There's an overwhelm that can happen, and you just blitz out. There's too much, and so curating what we're gonna do on this particular pilgrimage, and that's why one of the things we've developed for Italy in particular is like a rotation. Like we'll have Italy 1, Italy 2, 3, and 4, and they will focus on different themes and different geographical locations in Italy, but scaling it down so that we can sink into the experiences and really draw out of them and go home having experienced it versus just, running just to
sinking.
and then being so burnt out, which
yeah.
certainly can happen. But learning how to pace, learning how to be sensitive to your physical needs. Like people have jet lag when they get there.
Right.
People need,
Right.
but say
You're on a pilgrimage.
yeah, well, that's a good point too. But one thing I was just gonna say too, because you asked what makes it the integration pilgrimage, an integration pilgrimage. We talked about preparation and also bringing up the itinerary, like the intentionality of the itinerary, the input of the talks, like the themes that are intentionally spotlighting this integrated look of the human person. But a core component of an integration pilgrimage is that we offer accompaniment, personal accompaniment. And so we'll have a taste of that on the pilgrimage itself. We have mentors actually coming on site.
Wow.
And walking in a general way with us,
Right.
with the group. But we have a follow-up period, which is, there's group follow-up, there's accompanied follow-up, and there's the opportunity for individual mentorship.
Right.
That's connected with the themes of that pilgrimage. So, sometimes when you go on a trip like this, things come up and it touches your whole life story, and it's a safe place to begin to look at things that you don't have time in your everyday life that you might be running from. You're just busy, and suddenly, like you said, you're in a chapel in adoration, and something just hits you, and it's a moment, a God moment. And to be able to be accompanied through that, what does this mean for your life? Where's the healing that you're being invited into, to have someone walk with you after that pilgrimage experience and help you come back into home as a renewed person and sustain that race. So that's another very fundamental part of what it makes an integration pilgrimage different, and that's the connection we have with the Catholic Psych Institute, because we partnered
I
with.
think with what you're also showing there is that the pilgrimage is one part of it, but the pilgrimage ends up being kind of the symbol for the lifelong pilgrimage, that we keep going. Just like I went and I visited this shrine, I prayed there, that was great. Now I come home and I just go back to everything being exactly the way that it was before.
Right.
No, what's meant to happen is, It's the wise men going to see Jesus and then going home. So, I didn't even, no, I didn't mean to do that. Now I feel like I'm plagiarizing. It's cheesy, but they go home a different way, changed.
No, it's by a different way.
But that's exactly.
Like really truly to go back transformed, and then to give people, here's the stuff, here are the tools that will help you to continue what you've experienced. I think that's always like, that's the last talk of every retreat, right? What now? What do we do now? How are you going to take this home? How are you going to actualize this in your life, right? Well, now the beauty is you're actually giving those tools for that continued follow-up, for the way of people continuing the pilgrimage even when they're back to their ordinary, to the automatic, to the routine. All right, tell us about the book then.
No, well, I was just going to say this is such a worthwhile read for those going on pilgrimage. It's By a Different Way by Father Clinton Sensat, and this is exactly the premise: is when you do a pilgrimage and when you do it right, in so much as you are open to this encounter with Christ, like the wise men who encountered Christ, they could not go back the way they came because they were different, and they left by a different way, and that's the beauty and the power of this encounter. I mean, it's not pilgrimage just detached from the person. It's meeting Christ, meeting Jesus, and him meeting you, letting him meet you in all of who you are, and you cannot not be changed, right? And I just go back to my own story, and I think, I was 14 when I went on that experience, that pilgrimage, and the seeds of that encounter and the way it was nurtured when I came home by people who invested in me. I mean, here I am decades later, and that is a pivotal moment of my life. I go back to that point and I, can say, this wasn't a trip. Like, I met someone there, and I think that's what we want to offer people. So
That's awesome.
I think that's a good note for us to wrap this up.
Yeah.
Jennifer, thank you.
thank you.
This is great. Yeah, where can people find out about your pilgrimages?
So we have a website, integrationpilgrimages.com, and we will be, posting new itineraries and dates that we will be going, and so you can see us there.
Thanks for watching today's video. Let us know what you thought down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe.